Hi, I'm Girard Sagmiller, and welcome to Interviewed by a Parent. Today we are talking with Lisa Berry about sensory integration. Lisa, as a parent, why is it important for me to know about sensory integration, or what is it?
Sensory integration is the foundation for all development. It's how we interact with our environment, how we get signals from the environment, how we process those, and how we determine how to react to the environment. When we are in utero, the sensory system starts developing. It is basically our nervous system. So when the nerve pathways are laid, the foundation for processing that sensory information is started. And many of the senses start early in fetal development, and a baby can sense the vestibular sense, that rocking, that movement. There are 7 senses. There are 5 that we are familiar with: the vision, and that breaks down into acuity and perception; auditory or hearing; tactile, which is touch, and the tactile system breaks down into that protective and the discriminative. The discriminative tactile system is that light touch, and the protective is more of that deep pressure. Olfactory is the sense of smell. Gustatory is taste. And then the other 2 senses are proprioception, and it determines where your body is in space. Proprioceptors detect movement in and around the joints, ligaments, tendons, and muscles. The other sense is the vestibular sense. This is the sense of movement. It senses our pull with gravity, especially where our head is in space. And the vestibular system is a unifying system, and it helps organize the information from the other senses. Sensory integration is like a pyramid. You have those base 7 senses, and how we process that information determines how we interact with our environment and how we learn. And so it ties into every developmental milestone. Although typically sensory integration is automatic, when it isn't automatic, it literally is a nervous breakdown. Since the sensory system is the central nervous system, when the central nervous system, or the receptors in one or more of our senses, isn't working efficiently and effectively, something is off. There's a breakdown in learning. There's a gap in the learning, whether it is at the sense level, whether it is not meeting those developmental milestones, whether it is difficulty learning. Somewhere there will be a gap. It could be that, depending on how the child takes in that information, could be that the nervous system could be overloaded or understimulated. Whatever the case may be, if there is a sensory integration breakdown and it's a big enough glitch, it interferes with learning.
Lisa, let me ask you this. I know some dyslexics, they've said they've had, when they read, which I'm dyslexic myself, there's too much light comes in to their eyes, and they actually try to filter it down by using overlays and stuff. Would that fall in this category?
It would. It would refer to the visual processing, and any time a person has difficulty with that visual processing, especially like you were talking about with dyslexia, it would take so much focus to read and decode that any other information might be hard to process, whether it's auditory information or extra light like you were talking about.
So sitting in the back of a classroom and hearing all the children between you and the teacher could actually cause or enhance the challenge?
Absolutely, no question, because the sensory integration piece is bringing all of that together, and the more things you have to process, if you have sensory integration challenges, the more difficult it is, because you're trying to filter all of those things. And if you're trying to focus on something and your filtering system, or that nervous system or sensory system, isn't working typically or efficiently or effectively, it's going to be more difficult. There are many variables with sensory integration. The same person processes information on a continuum for day to day. Some of those variables include sleep. We're not going to be able to process information as efficiently if we're tired or if we're hungry. The environment, the surrounding environment is a variable. Most people are able to process information in a more quiet environment versus a noisy one. With a child or an individual with challenges in sensory integration. Typically, it's going to be much more difficult for them to process and focus in a classroom when there's a lot of different activity going on in different sensory channels, like the auditory, somebody opening and shutting the door, somebody dropping their pencil, the visual, their friends walking by, passing papers up and down, that type of thing. It's harder to focus on one thing when you need to filter a lot of different information. Everyone has sensory needs and preferences and learning styles. Some children are auditory learners. Most children tend to be visual learners or hands-on learners. Some people may like having the heavy covers on them at night, where some may not. Some people, when learning in the classroom, may need a hand fidget or might fidget their fingers or fiddle with their fingers, even though they're attending and taking in that information. They need that tactile input or proprioceptive input to help them focus. There may be children who refuse to wear their coats. It could be the sensory preference that they don't like a particular coat on their skin. It could be that they like the cool air on their skin. That's just another example of a sensory preference. Within that range of typical sensory integration, you can be closer to that low sensitivity range where things don't register quite as quickly or as efficiently. It takes more intensity of input to register, all the way through that typical range to that higher sensitivity range, which you get into the tactile defensiveness, or the system is on alert. Things get registered more quickly, and it targets that autonomic nervous system, that fight or flight system, which signals the brain that something dangerous is happening and they need to get away. When sensory integration becomes a concern, or when there are sensory integration challenges, is when it interferes with their functioning at home or at school on a consistent basis. Personally, I have oral sensory issues with eating. I've always been a picky eater, but it doesn't affect my ability to function. There may be a child in preschool or an infant or someone older where the oral processing does affect their functioning because it affects their nutrition, and then that would be the difference of when it needs to be addressed.
Lisa, some children have sensory challenges with texture of foods in their mouth, and it might take up to 100 times or something, I read, before a child will accept certain foods in their mouth. How does that work?
Well, that would be a specific area of difficulty with processing sensory information, and it would be, that example would be oral sensory processing or touch processing. And basically what happens when a child is defensive to food or anything, when they get that stimulus, whether it's the food, the texture, whatever it may be, or the smell, it actually registers in the nervous system as something dangerous, and they automatically go into the fight or flight reaction. And that's why it's difficult. They're not doing it for behavior, they're doing it because it's a nervous system reaction that's dangerous, and it's just a survival mechanism for them to get away from that. Sensory integration is a natural process. It occurs in the central nervous system at a subconscious level. Typically, sensory integration is automatic. And sensory processing is our ability to take information in from the senses. Sensory integration is the process of bringing that all together, and it's fun. My job as an occupational therapist is fun because when I work with children for sensory integration, we're running, jumping, playing, targeting those proprioceptive, tactile, and vestibular senses because they're the first to develop. And since it's foundational, we build from the bottom up and try and correct or tune how a child or individual takes in that information. And it is important that it be child or individual driven, because if it's not fun, then it's not organizing for that child's system.
My son, he grinds his teeth, and they've tried lead vests on him to weigh him down to give us sensory. Do you have any suggestions in what's going on there?
I would go first with the oral. If he's grinding his teeth, he's trying to get that proprioceptive or deep pressure input. So I would try things like chewy snacks or crunchy snacks, things like that. They have some products on the market to chew on. things like that, to give him that same type of input first. I would try that. But that, again, is referring to that oral sensory processing, and then also that proprioception, which is one of the hidden senses. We have two hidden senses. Proprioception, which is our awareness where we are in space, and we have proprioceptors in our joints, muscles, and tendons, and it detects what kind of pressure there is. And when kids or adults seek out that deep pressure, it's just a way of their system trying to organize and know where their body is in space. So if he is doing that in the mouth, I would start there. Because sensory integration is just a natural part of everything that we do in development and learning, you are already using sensory integration strategies with yourself, with your child, and so it makes it easier to incorporate them into daily routines. May just be different sensory strategies in addition to things that are already working for you. And it doesn't have to be more work. Naturally, some children may need more assistance organizing their nervous system for learning than others. And they may need some individual accommodations, like the seating preferences, maybe seated away from the door, or different noise sources. And different things like that. And that's something to work through as a team with parents, teachers, and the occupational therapist if that is warranted. Although some children may have the same level of a sensory need, each child presents with a unique set of sensory behaviors, and that's really important to recognize. And another thing to remember is that those sensory behaviors, even with that individual child, will fluctuate from day to day and maybe within the day, based on the activity.
Lisa, does everybody pretty much have some kind of sensory integration? I know styrofoam bothers me.
Well, sensory integration is just the process of taking in the information. Sensory integration challenges would be what you're talking about, having difficulty processing that or registering different than other people. The common denominator of the sensory integration challenges and how to address them is proprioception. And proprioception, again, the reason why it's one of the first senses to develop, it's one of the senses that helps unify things with the tactile and vestibular sense. But the main reason that occupational therapists focus on this is because there's rarely any negative reactions to that. There's rarely any negative reactions to that proprioceptive input, and that actually sends, when the proprioceptors in the muscles, tendons, and joints are elicited through that heavy work or deep pressure, actually sends chemicals to help organize the brain and help focus. And what's great about proprioception is you may have a child that is that sensory seeker and has lots of energy and is very fidgety, and you may have a child that's under-aroused and kind of lethargic. You can do the same type of proprioceptive activity and it will bring their arousal levels to where they need to be, even though they're on two completely different ends of that sensory processing spectrum. Outside of the classroom or in the home, different things you can do to develop that ability to process information with the proprioception or that deep pressure input and vestibular information is rough and tumble play, sports, just variation of routines, just those natural sensory breaks, changing of activities throughout the day, and just exploring the environment and tapping into all of the senses as much as you can throughout the day. At school, things that a teacher can do that will target the whole class and not just target your child. And again, this is where those sensory strategies benefit all children in general education and special education, are brain energizers. Those are just frequent sensory breaks. It could be standing up and stretching. It could be balancing on one foot to target that coordination and balance. It could be changing seating positions, asking the child, or just taking a restroom break as a class, or asking the child to run an errand to the office, or taking a restroom break. Again, doing stretches, classroom jobs. Those are wonderful opportunities if a child is in need of a certain type of input. If your child is a sensory seeker and likes to move around, they could be the paper passer. if they seek that deep pressure input and have their hands on things a lot, they could erase the whiteboard or the chalkboard. They could be pencil sharpener. The electric pencil sharpeners will work too, but it's best if you have a manual one. There are lots of different classroom jobs, even including opening the door. A teacher could have a clipboard, and they have the clipboards. You can open them up and you can put some weights in there. They can carry that and carry the teacher's clipboard for them, or you can weight just a regular clipboard down. There's lots of different things you can do to help them get that sensory input to focus without targeting or pinpointing the child in the class. Another sensory strategy to look at is the oral motor. And it just depends on your school rules as far as gum, if it's allowed, that type of thing. But a lot of times sucking on hard candy or taking a break with whistles or having a crunchy snack versus something that a child might typically bring, or drinking thick liquids through a straw like applesauce or pudding, or through a coffee stir, anything that takes that deep pressure and a lot of muscles, that proprioceptive in the mouth, that will help increase focus.
Lisa, other parents have informed me I'm not sure why, they brush their children each day. Why do they do that?
You're referring to the Wilbarger brushing protocol, and that was developed by two occupational therapists, and it was originally developed for tactile defensiveness, and it is a specified program that a therapist trained in that would train the parent on, and it is to help desensitize the child to touch processing. Again, classroom jobs are a great way to facilitate sensory breaks. Some that really target the proprioceptive system are opening doors, having the child unstack or stack the chairs, carrying library books or library crate to and from, to carry a laundry basket with lunch boxes and coats if that's what they do at that school. And if not, you could create that. A lot of times you'll find that teachers and principals and school staff are very open to these ideas, especially if it helps the child organize their system. Another great thing about these classroom jobs is it helps the child with their self-esteem and makes them feel like they're doing something to help. So if you present it as something that, oh, will you help the teacher do this? Then you're kind of taking, again, that spotlight off of them, that it's something to help them organize. Other jobs, staple papers, be the paper passer, setting up or breaking down activities in PE or music class or other special classes, helping rearrange classroom furniture, carry a clipboard that's weighted. You can wear a backpack and put a couple of extra books or a weight in that throughout the day to give that constant input. Tennis balls on opposite legs of the chair, if you have chairs with the four legs, to allow a little bit of movement. And that taps into the vestibular sense also. Theraputty before or after work, if there's any downtime. TheraBand exercises. Sitting in a beanbag during floor time. Beanbags are great because they help define space, and that proprioceptive system is all about where your body is in space. So that beanbag, or if a child needs less proprioceptive input but isn't sure where their body is in space, you could even do, like in preschool or kindergarten, like squares to sit on, carpet squares. Lap buddy, or like a weighted sock with rice on their lap or on their shoulders. Laying on the floor to do homework, propped up on their arms. Again, OTs would love this because it's great for that shoulder development and fine motor development. There are weighted pencils, there are finger weights, ankle weights, hand weights. There are deep pressure vests that provide constant proprioceptive input, and there's also weighted vests, and they have a little bit of different effect, so it's just through trial and error, like all of these strategies. Multisensory learning activities are so important, and just to review, they always involve one or more sense, and students can learn through listening, feeling, seeing, moving, tasting, and smelling. Some activities for that multisensory learning, and you can always tie this into school, is to write their name, letters, numbers, their spelling words in a variety of different media. You can use pop rocks and water. Just have pop rocks and you put a little water and you have the trace with their finger, different things, shaving cream or whipped cream to draw in, rice, sugar, salt, pudding, cornmeal, condensed milk, and you can experiment with that. There are lots, you could do coffee, anything you have in the cabinet, and just have fun. And that's multisensory because it's touch, it's visual. A lot of times there's a scent with those things.
How about when a child has like fluid on the ears and they need tubes? What physical stuff can influence the sensories?
Well, that can definitely. The other hidden sense is the vestibular sense, and that is how we detect gravity and where your head is in space. So when you have fluid in the ears, it affects the vestibular system because the actual physical component of the vestibular system is located in the inner ear. And so when there's fluid, it can throw your balance off, in addition to possibly having implications with speech and language development. My soapbox as an occupational therapist is recess. And a lot of times teachers don't have options or feel like they don't have options when a child is misbehaving. They automatically take away recess. One thing I would warn against this, especially if it's a child with sensory integration challenges, they need that movement break. They need to explore their world. That will help them organize and will help them get back and focused. And really, it's best not to take it away from any child just because every child needs that break. And so just to problem solve as a team is different as other options to meet sensory needs. You could even, if there is behavior and recess was the only time for that discipline, you could even tie sensory into it. You could make them do wall push-ups on the side of the school building, or you could have them run laps or walk. Something with that movement is going to help both the child and to correct that behavior as opposed to taking away recess. It's a good idea always to alternate between movement and seated activities every 10 to 15 minutes if possible, and it could be a quick 5-second stand up and stretch and sit back down. Those multi-sensory lessons using all of those channels, the more you can do that, the better learning for all children. For the child that gets overstimulated very easily, it's important to have a repertoire of different calming activities. And it's not uncommon for children after they've had a lot of activity or after something funny happens, if they have sensory integration challenges, to get overstimulated and have trouble self-regulating and getting themselves back to that place where they can focus. So these calming activities can help. And it just depends on the child. Again, it's trial and error, what works for them. But some ideas are dimming the lights and using a soft voice, pastel or darker colors as opposed to bright, little or nothing on the walls or from the ceiling, clear the table except for what they're currently focusing on, classical music at 50 to 70 beats per minute in the background. Another wonderful thing about that classical music, it calms, but it also blocks out a lot of the background noise from computers or heaters or from the lights. Again, those heavy work, deep pressure, and proprioceptive activities have a calming effect. Rocking chair or slow swinging, anything rhythmic and slow. The sense of smell can be very therapeutic and very effective, helping regulate the sensory system. Some calming scents, and you always want to check for allergies, are lavender, chamomile, patchouli, orange oil, and rose. One way to do those calming scents is, especially for younger kids, or you could incorporate this at recess for any age, or to have bubbles and put a couple drops of essential oil of those calming scents in and then have them blow the bubbles. So they're getting that oral motor and that proprioceptive from that, plus they're getting the calming from the scent. There's room spray, plug-ins, scent stories is another example, candles not lit. And then there are the children that appear kind of lethargic, they're more under-aroused. It takes more intense sensory input for them to be alert and focused, and so it's good to have a list and a pocket full of alerting activities for them. And alerting activities typically are bright lights, a stronger voice, primary or bright colors, having them change positions a lot, using multi-sensory cues, sometimes the tap on the shoulder, but if they have sensory challenges, always make sure that they see you coming so you don't alert their sensory system if they're sensitive to touch. Using alerting or awakening scents, some of which include eucalyptus, pine, lemon, peppermint, jasmine. And again, you can put those into bubbles, and using the sense of smell, you can do different things with room spray, candles, and then also alerting oral motor is peppermint candy or lemon drops.
How long has sensory integration been around, or been a therapy, should I say?
Well, and actually it's a theory. Sensory integration was coined by Dr. Jean Ayres in 1979. She's an occupational therapist, and she coined it as the organization of senses for use. Regarding sensory integration therapy, if you feel like your child needs to be evaluated, or they already have, and they do have sensory integration challenges that affect their ability to participate and learn at home and at school, then there are sensory integration options. Again, the school versus the home setting. With the school, one thing that legally we have to look at as occupational therapists and school professionals is if it's educationally relevant, if we can prove that it's directly related to their education. And just to reiterate, sensory integration is so important, and that the multisensory strategies, educators are becoming aware that these are what are effective and what work, and especially for the children with sensory integration challenges. These strategies are the future for their education. It targets every child's learning style, and they're fun. It motivates kids to learn. It promotes a higher level of thinking, and it makes the learning fun and rewarding.
Thanks, Lisa, for being with us today on Interviewed by a Parent. You have a website that people can go look at for more information about this?
I do. It's www.everymovecounts.net, and there are links for sensory integration and other information about development.
Great. Also, if you want to know more information about this product or other products we have at the Gifted Learning Project, please visit our website at thegiftedlearningproject.org. Thank you.